The story of La Llorona, which is a Hispanic, New Mexican, and Mexican folklore tale about this lady in white who is looking for her children, and they call her the ditch witch because it was told to kids to kind of keep them out of the dry arroyos or flash floods so you don't get washed away. So they would tell you gotta watch out near the ditches because La Llorona, she'll get you. So as a kid, you're afraid of La Llorona. I mean, that was 100% in my mind, right?
Welcome back. I'm here with John Strader. John, welcome.
Hello, welcome.
Okay. Now, normally I would start this episode talking about the next episode, and I'm going to explain very quickly. But in order to do that, we have to get through, because I like to typically ground the audience on stuff that is very concrete before I get into stuff that borders on quote unquote the woo, right?
Right.
But the woo, and I shouldn't say the woo, but you've had experiences that led you into the second part. Now, the second part, and I want to just give the audience a teaser about this. John, through family connections, which I verified through old newspaper articles, internet searches, etc., public records, John was tied to a family that is tied to the McDonnell Douglas company. And that's kind of all we're going to say there. You can do your own research and you can find it if you kind of know what to look for. And it's a very complicated family structure, right? It's not the Strader family, so don't waste your time searching there.
Don't let them waste their time.
But lots of marriages and you can kind of figure it out. But I vetted him as well as I could based on public information, and he checks out. So we're going to get into the McDonnell Douglas, its association with crash retrievals, its association or lack of association with the paperclip Nazis, which is also an interesting thing. But before we get into that, the first episode, we're going to cover some of the experiences that John has had that led up to his burning desire to talk to members of the McDonnell Douglas executives, things like that, to get him, to learn more about this so-called mystery. So that's a long lead up. It's longer than I normally have, John. So with that, one thing you mentioned when we talked before this interview is you were talking about Chris Bledsoe and the lady. Now I'm jumping straight into the deep end.
Okay.
You said you've actually had some experiences there. Let's start with that, and then we'll work our way back to the beginning.
Oh, it's weird because my story doesn't really start there. It actually starts way after that. But because the timeline of my life, nothing ever made sense to me. And so for me, my first inkling about UFOs and government and Air Force and all of that stuff was in 1985, and that's what started me digging into this, and then that's what made me remember these experiences that I had when I was younger.
By the way, 1985 is the same year Whitley Strieber had his experiences.
Yes, and when contact Communion.
Sorry, I shouldn't say the beginning of, but his book Communion covers.
Yeah, I didn't see the book till probably 88, but it was a big deal for me because, part of it's it's hard for me to tell one story that doesn't make sense in the chronology, because for me, all of that, it started when I was, the summer of 85. And I had a major sighting, and we can go into that, I guess, later. But that's what started me down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out what's going on, and knowing that Air Force jets were chasing UFOs. So, and I was like, I'm connected to a family that builds jets and, this and that. And so I need to get close to these people. I need to get in the room. I need to start, I need to start looking into this. So, but I didn't remember my experience with what we would call the lady until another huge experience happened to me in 1997.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Bain Books at bain.com.
So and I'm going to tell the story, but I'm just trying to get a little bit of backstory. So my wife and I had a huge sighting together in 97, and it was right before the X Games, and I'll tell that whole story later. But after the X Games, when I was injured severely at the X Games, I was, basically trying to understand the sighting and what was going on. Then the Phoenix Lights happened. It was the same craft. We had seen it about 5 weeks before. It was a huge deal. I thought, oh shit, they're coming out. Like, the aliens are coming. Like, I was like, ah. And so I was talking with her mother and her father, and this is in Taos, New Mexico. And we were talking about this huge sighting, and all of a sudden her dad starts telling me this story from like 1977. He goes, oh yeah, well, there's a lot of UFO sightings here or whatever. And he starts telling me that in the 70s, there was this story in the paper where on this road that goes southeast of Taos going to Mora and Las Vegas, New Mexico. I forget what the number of the highway, but it goes through Dixon. It goes all this way. And he goes, yeah, there was a UFO getting chased by a police officer and this and that. And it was right by this Buddhist retreat. And I went, and all of a sudden, all of the hair on the back of my neck when I had hair all went up. And I remembered this sighting, right? But I had always thought of it as a ghost story. I didn't understand the connection between paranormal experiences and UFOs. I had no idea about that. And I just freaked out. I was like, oh my God, was it Camp Summer Life? And he goes, well, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, well, and so we looked up, and the place he was talking about used to be a camp, a summer camp for kids. And I went to this camp, and I all of a sudden remembered this whole story, which I had told my wife about before, but I always told it as a ghost story because that's, as a 9, almost 10-year-old boy, that's the only way I could process it. Like, I thought I was seeing a ghost. I didn't know what the hell was happening. So the story is, so I'm at this place called Camp Summer Life. It was 1977. And this is going to get emotional because this is tied up with my family history. So this is about to get nuts.
Now, this is Camp Summer Life or
Summer Life, Life.
Okay.
So yeah, you can look it up. There's Facebooks. It doesn't exist anymore. A place bought it. Now it's like a Buddhist retreat and whatever. But it's the same space. It's the same area, right? And so I don't remember exactly, but one of the stories in New Mexico that's a classic ghost story that you would tell.
John, before you go into one thing I think is really important, and you don't have to answer this question, but you told me in private. Why now? Why are you coming out now?
That's a whole nother long. Well, I don't know if I can answer that very easily. It'll derail the other story. We can get into that if you want me to just start answering. I mean, but my history is important. Because I've had a history with this phenomenon my whole life. I've had many, many sightings. I've been doing my own research, since 1985. I've been desperate to understand this. I have seen twice in my life massive UFOs being chased by Air Force jets. So for me, I was always waiting for the moment when like a pilot would come out and say, I chased a UFO, because I knew that was real. So I was like, God, these guys, are they ever going to come out? And so when the 2017 thing dropped, like, I had already given up that there was ever going to be any disclosure. We were ever going to get any, because, when you're in this as long as I've been in it, for years, it would take, you wouldn't get any new news. Like, there'd be like one news story every couple years. Everyone would obsess on that, forever. And all of a sudden, like, when Elizondo and Mellon came out and all this stuff started happening, like, I was like, oh my God, like, it's starting to come out. Like, I can't believe it. So I started getting right back in and listening to all the podcasts and starting to really do my thing. And then I just realized that, like, I was still out of the loop because I was listening to these podcasts and they were mostly talking about info that was getting dropped on Twitter. And I was like very against social media, raising daughters. I was like, the last thing in the world I wanted to be was on Twitter. I was like, oh my God, no. And it was a very difficult decision for me. And I spoke to a few of my family members and friends who I'm really close with who understand my story. And they were like, what? You're going to go on Twitter and talk about UFO Twitter? Like, you said you'd never do that. And, that's, you can't put your name on the list. But I was like, look, man, like something's happening. Like the phenomena has ramped up. The talk about it has ramped up. It's getting mainstream coverage. People are coming out. They're releasing videos. Like, I've been waiting for this my whole life. I got to get in. And so I dove in and I haven't looked back. I never went anonymous. I was like, look, I'm too easy to track. I just need to be myself. And I started slow, and really it was Spaces. And many people maybe listening don't know what Spaces are, but they're like an audio chat room inside of Twitter, kind of like a radio talk show. And I started going into these spaces. At first, I just listened a lot. First, just even anonymously. I listened a lot anonymously because I want to know, who are these people? Who's in here? There's intelligence agencies in here. There could be foreign agents. There could be chaos agents, and I knew all of that. So I'm like, okay, I have to, I got to kind of tread lightly. But I was like, I have to be on the front lines. I need to know. So I started digging into this, started going into spaces, started speaking more and finding my voice in the community, and then just started going after what I considered liars, bullshitters, fake stories, fake videos, and promoting things that I knew or I believe that were real, and people that I had learned to trust, and stories that I knew about. And so I started pushing those things out, and I just started slowly gaining a following, but mostly because people would hear me talk in spaces. And I look at myself now as a spaces warrior. I understand there's a war of disinformation and information war going on, and that there's a lot of players. I mean, how many 3-letter agencies are there? 19 or something. And then, and then you have to take the foreign assets, and then you have to take, corporate assets that we know of. Exactly. So, I mean, it's a minefield in there, and it's dangerous. And so I knew that, but I have been trying to understand the phenomena, what it means to humanity, where our place is in the universe, and how I fit in, because I'm part of it. I'm connected to it. So I had to understand, and I realized the only way to do that was to just be unabashedly myself, come out hard, come out swinging, not be afraid to tangle with people, and to fight for what I believe is right, which is the truth coming out no matter what. So that's basically the quick version of that.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Okay, so go back to Camp Summer Life.
Okay, so to qualify how I perceive this lady, and that's why when I talk, when you hear like history, Lady of the Lake, Celtic legends, you have Chris Bledsoe seeing his lady, you have Lady of Guadalupe, people seeing Mother Mary. I mean, to me, it's all the same. I don't know if it's the same entity.
Apparitions.
Yes.
Stuff, right.
So yes, exactly. But I never was like, is it the same person? Is it just the same race? What is it? But for me, as a young boy, I didn't know any of this, right? So all I knew in northern New Mexico, and I'm sure, like, I don't remember exactly if they told this story at camp or what, but, we would sit around the campfire at night before we go to the cabin, and you tell ghost stories, right? I mean, that's what you do. And so the story of La Llorona, which is a Hispanic, New Mexican, and Mexican folklore tale about this lady in white who is looking for her children, and they call her the Ditch Witch, because it was told to kids to kind of keep them out of the dry arroyos or flash floods so you don't get washed away. And so they would tell you got to watch out near the ditches because La Llorona, she'll get you. So as a kid, you're afraid of La Llorona. I mean, that was 100% in my mind, right? So we have a cabin, and the way I can explain it is, so there was like a middle field, like a square field in the middle of the camp where, you have all the different buildings all around it. And that was like the meeting ground where you'd have sports and do events and all that kind of stuff. But then all the cabins were kind of around it. And then like on one side you had like, the gym and the cafeteria and the administration offices. So, but there was like a field. And in the cabins, they didn't have windows. They just had screens, right? They were very rustic. And there was groups of bunk beds. And so I'm awakened one night with a bright light shining in the window that was not supposed to be there. And it wakes up the kid on the top bunk. I'm on the bottom bunk. And we're like, whoa, what is this light? And so we go to the window and we're looking out through the screen. And all I see is like this shining pillar of light coming down. I don't see a craft, right? So I'm not thinking UFO. I just see a shining pillar of light, and standing in this light is this woman dressed in white. I think she was blonde, but I don't know. I cannot remember really the hair color. I think she was wearing kind of like a veil. It seemed like she was wearing a veil, but she was walking, but floating. You know what I mean? She wasn't touching the ground, but she was walking. So she was walking across towards another cabin. And I'm like, me and both this kid are seeing it. We're like, oh my God, it's La Llorona. So immediately in our mind, we're like, it's freaking La Llorona. Holy crap. And so we're watching, and she goes into a cabin, and it's literally emitting light out of the cabin.
How do you spell that, by the way? L-A what?
L-A and then L-L-O-R. I'm terrible at spelling. They did make a cheesy movie about it not too long ago, like some horror flick. I didn't watch it, but yeah, I don't know how to exactly spell it. But it's a very well-known story. And so my little brain is thinking, oh my God, it's La Llorona. So now I'm scared. Like, I'm scared because I'm like, oh shit, like it's a ghost, right? But she goes into this other cabin and I can see light emitting out of the cabin. Now, she didn't go in there and turn on the lights. I think she's like emitting light. Like, I don't know. But then after a little bit, she comes out and goes into another cabin. I'm like, oh shit. And then she comes out and she's coming right towards our cabin. So we freak out. We jump back into the covers. I'm like pulling the covers up. I'm shaking. I'm scared shitless now. I'm awake. Like, I'm like, and I can feel the light now. So I can feel the presence that she's in this room, and I can feel the light. You know how when you have your eyes closed, but you can feel the bright light. And so I look up, and then she's just right there. And she just tells me in my mind, it's okay. I'm here for my children. And then the next thing I know, I'm sitting at the edge of the bed. It's the next morning. I'm kind of shaking. I don't know what's happened. And the kid also is awake. And we quickly connect because other kids are starting to wake up. We're getting ready to go out to breakfast and stuff. And I'm like, you saw that, like La Llorona. And he's freaked out. It's like, And so I'm like, okay, confirmation. It wasn't a dream. He also, this experience happened to him. So I'm like in a panic over it. But we go out, and I don't remember if that was the last day of camp that week or if it was the next day. But then like camp's over, and I'm going home, and that was it. So for me, I was like, telling my mom, and people were like, oh my God, I saw a ghost. I saw La Llorona. Oh my God. And everyone's like, yeah, you saw a ghost. You saw your La Llorona, ghost stories, blah, blah. And so for most of my life, I just chalked it up to, wow, I don't know. I had this crazy thing when I was a kid. I thought I saw La Llorona. I don't know. It was a ghost. And so I never once ever put that in a category of could be the phenomena or an alien race or, anything like that. Like, I'd never heard of any of that. So it wasn't until he said there was a police car chasing a UFO right in front of that camp, basically the same summer that I was there. And then I flashed to remembering it. And then I'm remembering the pillar of light. And I'm like, oh my God, was she coming down from some kind of craft or something? And so all of a sudden, the wheels are turning in my head going is that related to it wasn't a ghost. It was some sort of holy shit moment, So that was a big, oh shit moment for me. Right. But what happened, and this gets into this sort of darker aspect and the trauma associated with every time I had any sort of experience. So this is a big one, and this connects to the family. So all I can say is my mom was married to a McDonald, and they had 3 kids, and then she left him and married my dad, right? So I was not a McDonald, but my brothers and sisters were, and my mom used to be married into the family and all of that. So I was still very close to my brothers and sisters, and, we were all very close. My older sister, Leslie, was 10 years older than me. And so she was 19 at the time. And so I get back from camp and we take a trip to San Diego, and my mom and my brother, and we come back from San Diego, and I have a small earache. And then like there's this day where all of a sudden I'm in just horrific pain. Now, I did not know. Okay, so all of these stories I'm telling you now, I'm telling you now after I figured out the timeline of my life. I never was able to put all of these things together as connected until way later in my adult life when I really was digging into this, because I knew all of these events as separate things that happened to me, but I didn't know they were all right at the exact same time till I was figuring out the timeline of my life, because that was how I figured out what was going on. Because I had to go back and be like, when was this, Mom? When exactly did this happen? And when did this happen? And was this before this? And that kind of thing. So the crazy thing, and I just recently found this out because talking about what happened to my sister was the hardest thing in the world for anyone in my family to talk to. So I'm trying to tell it from a perspective now where I understand what happened, because I didn't then. I was a boy. So all of a sudden, I am like, my mom takes me to the hospital because I'm having this excruciating pain in my brain and my ear. And it's like, it's overwhelming me. And I'm screaming with pain. And she doesn't know what's going on with me. And she's like, what the fuck is going on with my kid? And they're like, well, it must be an ear. Maybe he's got an ear infection. I don't know. So they take me in there. And this whole day, I'm in the hospital with my mom and my uncle, who's a doctor. And they're like, giving me painkillers. And they're trying to clean my ear out. And they're like, this doesn't seem right. Why is he? And so they were worried like I had something wrong because I was having so much suffering and pain, right? Now, my sister and I were very connected. She was like a mother to me because my mom was always working as a single mother. So, my sister was always around. She was taking care of us. We would stay with her all the time. We were very close. Now, I don't have evidence of this, but looking back now, I'm pretty sure she was also an experiencer and that we had experiences together. So we were linked. And even my mother was like, you two were linked. Like, she didn't say psychic. She doesn't believe in that stuff. But, she was like, you two were special. There was some bond that you two had. So that same day, my sister disappeared. And nobody knew where she went. And she was supposed to be at work that day. She didn't show up for work. She was supposed to go out to lunch with my grandma. My grandma's like, she didn't show up for lunch. So the family is looking for her, but no one's in a panic, right? Because
now is this a like full sibling or is this a half sibling?
This is Leslie McDonald. So she is my half. We have the same mother, but she's a McDonald and I'm not. So we have the same mother. So she is looking, she's disappeared. Now, nobody in the family is in a panic over it because, she's 19, she parties, she does drugs, she hangs out with bikers, and she's kind of a wild child. So they're like, oh, maybe she blew off work, maybe she's partying with some friends, whatever. So no one's really looking into it, right? Well, that night, so I come home, they've got me on painkillers and stuff like that. I'm all drugged up. And that night I have a psychic vision and it's horrific. And it's of my sister being tortured, raped, murdered in a horrific way. I don't even want to go into the detail. It's horrific, but I'm literally like living it like that night. And I'm 9 years old. I'm like, I don't understand. And I walk out the next morning and I hate to even say this because my mom will be very pissed off, but I walk in and I just, at this point they know Leslie didn't go home last night. So now they're a little more concerned. It's the next day. Still no one knows anything, but they know she didn't come home and that's a problem. Where is she? And now they're calling around. Like, did she spend the night with a friend? Did she this? Did she that? And I just walk into the room wide-eyed, freaked out because now I've woken up and I've had this horrible vision, right? And I just say, she's dead, Mom. She's dead. She's dead. And my mother just goes, don't say that, and slaps me across the face. And I just shut down. And literally for months, I don't say a word. She's sending me to doctors. They don't know what's wrong with me. They can't figure out what's going on. They don't know anything. But I couldn't tell her, like, I saw Leslie die, right? So I'm just in shock. I'm PTSD. Like, I don't know what to make of this experience. And it just literally shuts me down. And so a couple days later, they find my sister, and she had been taken with this other woman, and there was these 3 other guys involved. And because of the family name and Leslie's dad and all that, this becomes a huge news story in New Mexico. And I don't want to go into the whole situation. Anyone who wants to look it up can. But the guy who killed her, they ended up being 3 trials over 15 years. He escaped from prison at some point. My mom was like actively involved in the investigation. He was hooked up with like biker mobs, and they had put hits out on my mom, hits out on my family, hits out on the DA. And the DA was a guy named Ira Robinson, but the assistant DA was a guy named Steve Schiff, a name that will come up later on in the story. So that is my lady story. I've never seen her again. I don't know what happened, but it felt like it was, connected. And then I psychically lived this horrible situation, and I never understood. And it felt like, once I realized and made all the connections, and I was like, oh my God. So that when my mom told me that day that Leslie went missing, I was having, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I knew something horrible was happening, and I was having, physical reaction to it. But I couldn't explain that to anybody. I didn't know what was happening. So, and my mom just, the last thing she wanted to hear when her daughter was missing was someone saying she was dead, Now she doesn't even remember doing that. And she's like, I don't remember that at all. I'm like, oh, I never forgot it. That was a, because I was scared to death and I was freaked out. And then you just slapped me, and I just shut down. So I was going through hardcore trauma after that. Now, not long after that, we moved to another house. Now, I used to have these lucid dreams where she was in it, and we would fly together, weird shit. And I think this is what I was remembering possible abductions with her. I'm not sure, but I used to have these lucid kind of dreams, that were all tied up with her. And so I kept trying to reconnect with her, knowing she was gone. And we had moved to another house where we had a tree, and it was a very tall cottonwood tree. And I only recently told my mom what was happening that day. But so I climbed up through the tree and I was 40 feet up in the air, with the thin branches where it's swinging, because I thought if I could get up high enough, I could connect with her. I was trying to connect. I knew that if I got up, I could maybe see her, I could connect with her. And then I fell out of the tree. And I fell 30 feet and broke my back in 3 places, crushed my ankle, broke my face, and was hospitalized for a long time. And it was another one where I was trying to connect to her, to the phenomena, to something. And then I was flicked, pushed out of the tree. It felt very much like it was on purpose. I don't know. And so it was, a lot of trauma associated around this sighting, or whatever it would be called, I don't even know, experience with this lady. And I never made those connections. And I never understood that there was a connection between trauma and, experiences. So that was something, I figured out way later.
How old were you when you fell out of the tree?
10. I was 9, almost 10 when it happened. And then it was, I don't know, 6-8 months afterwards.
So I know two famous experiencers who also had things like near-death experiences like that. I mean, when I say near-death, I don't mean seeing the light and things like that. It's just like grievous injury. One of them is Chris Bledsoe, and where he was shot with shotgun shells in the back. And then the second is Christopher Robinson, where he had a heart issue. He's a precognitive dreamer who worked for MI5 and MI6 for 30 years. So anyway, I just want to make that connection explicit.
I had never heard of Bledsoe or the lady until Spaces. And when I first heard the first person in there talking about it, I immediately went back to that moment. I was like, oh my God, is that the same thing? Is that the same thing? This guy's experiencing it? So I was like, but like I said, it was a one-time event for me. I was never repeatedly, I didn't have conversations. I didn't, you know what I mean? They didn't come to me and talk to me. I don't know. Like, I don't know. But that was when I was like, oh my God, like, you know, I started doing more research into what this lady and the phenomena is and the associated traumas. I didn't know any of this stuff. This was never in my wheelhouse. I was studying nuts and bolts. I was studying aerospace companies. I was studying government cover-up. Like, that's where I lived, because all of the woo, this sort of psychic aspect of it, scared the shit out of me. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to relive those memories. And so whenever I would, think of that, like come back so hard. So I was trying to avoid those topics completely because I couldn't handle it. It was too much for me. I just didn't, I couldn't, it did not compute, I just couldn't do it.
Okay. So what else, what other experiences led you down the rabbit hole to start to ask questions?
Okay, well, that would be June '85. Now, once again, so this is another one of these experiences that's once again tied up with trauma.
Really quick, the Camp Summer Life. What year did that happen?
77.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So I think. Okay, all right.
Yeah, it was July of 77 when I was there. I was there also. Yeah. So now here's the thing. So there's quite a few stories within this. And I didn't put them all together, once again, until I had been doing the research. And I went, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Now, the one thing I didn't say about the Leslie situation, and this is something just in my own life, like everything always came in threes. So there was always some horrible trauma. Then there was some sort of media attention or notoriety or something around it. And then me having some kind of experience. So I have the psychic thing. I see this lady. I live my sister's death. Then it's in the newspapers. I'm quoted in the newspaper as a 10-year-old boy. I mean, that's the first time I ever pop up anywhere, is me telling my mom, like, nothing is ever going to be the same again. And that's the first time John Strader comes up in any sort of newspaper. I was 10 years old and we were already on the second trial and they were interviewing my mom. So there's all this media attention. There's all this press. I have a sighting and I have trauma and pain and suffering. So, I'm going to tell this sort of in a reverse order because, like I said, everything for me started with this one sighting. So I'm in Angel Fire, New Mexico, and that's where I grew up in my teen years. I was in Albuquerque before that. And so, my mom, part of the reason we moved up there is because the guy who had killed my sister had escaped from prison, hits out on my family, and my mom was scared to death and wanted to get us the hell out of Albuquerque where we could be found and hide out, basically. So there was no smaller place to hide out than Angel Fire, New Mexico. And she was a realtor agent. So she was going back and forth there. And so she met a man up there and ended up marrying him. And then we moved up there when I was, summer I was 12 and turned 13 that end of the summer. So at that point, okay, I'm just living life up in the small town. I'm skiing all the time and I'm on the ski area there in Angel Fire and I see this great plateau. So the way you can explain Angel Fire is it's a place called Moreno Valley, right? And it's east of Taos, New Mexico. And the Moreno Valley is a nice long valley that runs north or south. The Wheeler Peak is the highest mountain in New Mexico and it overlooks the entire valley. You can see it from everywhere. Eagle Nest Lake is right here. And then Angel Fire is on the south end. And there was this high mountain plateau called the Valley of the Utes that you could it was probably about 9,000, maybe 9,200 feet high, but it was a nice, beautiful plain and you could see it only from the ski area because if you were down in the valley, it just looked like the top of the mountain. You couldn't see that right above that was this flat area, this big plain. And so we would see it this winter and I was like, man, we got to go camping. We got to go, we can get into a spot over there. We could see the whole valley. This would be awesome. So I have this 76 Chevy Blazer, which I'm very proud of, the Beauty, we called it. And so I take my friend who still will not allow me to use his name, and you'll hear why soon. And I did reach out to him about 4 years ago, and I'm like, come on, man, everything's happening. Let's go. Come out with me on this. He absolutely refused. So we start trying to get to this place. Now, there's no GPS in those days, so I had to try a whole bunch of different ways. It was a private ranch. Couldn't go on it. It was definitely trespassing. And I was found a way. There was power lines. I went up this a utility road along the power lines on four-wheeling and going on these logging trails. We finally get to the edge of this property and we like snipped the, sorry to say if he ever got mad, snipped the barbed wire and we went in. So I 4-wheel, we go all the way to this spot, and we have this perfect place where we can now see the whole valley. You can see Eagle Nest, you can see Angel Fire, you can see people coming through the pass, the Paulo Machado Pass, you can see the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Chapel, which was always lit up. So you got this beautiful view of the valley. And we build a little fire. We're not drinking, I'm 17, turning 18 that summer. And so we're just hanging out, and we're like watching satellites and airplanes. And of course, in those days, there was a lot less junk in the sky. Satellites were bigger. You could spot them really easily. You're like, that's a satellite. That's a plane. There wasn't as many planes flying over. It just was a lot less air clutter, right? So things that appeared showed like they stood out. So we're just watching all this and having a, interesting evening. And it's, 1:32 in the morning-ish. And all of a sudden across the valley, this light just appears. Bing! And it's bright. And it's lower than Wheeler Peak. And I'm immediately like, whoa, what's that? And I think I say that every single time I see a UFO. I'm like, whoa, what's that? And I'm like, what's that? And then he looks. And so we're watching it. We're like, and it's not zipping around or doing any maneuvers. It's just sort of doing this. Kind of bobbing and weaving, kind of floating, and sometimes it would go below one of like the peak is up here and it's doing this, but sometimes it would dip below like other, there's other like ridges between. So it would kind of go down and then it would pop back up and then it would go over a ridge and you would see it lighting up the trees. It was bright enough that it's lighting the trees. So in our, we were Boy Scouts and stuff. So we're like, oh my God, it's got to be, because we're trying to figure out what could it be, going through all the different iterations of what it could be. This point, we're not thinking UFO at all. I'm thinking it's search and rescue, and they're looking for lost hikers on the side of Wheeler Peak. That was pretty common back then. People didn't have GPS. They would get lost up there, and they'd have to send the Hueys, spotlights, and they'd go looking for people. And I knew people in search and rescue. So we're like, search and rescue, wow. So we're watching it going, oh my God, maybe we'll see it land or, who knows? So we're watching this thing happen. And it keeps sort of going south slowly, just kind of petering along. It's not doing anything crazy. And all of a sudden it just goes straight up and takes off. I mean, it goes way higher than the mountain and then just zooms south like that. I mean, in an instant, stops straight up, takes off. Now I'm like, oh my God, and now I'm having a panic. And I don't know why. Okay, I don't know why I'm panicking, but I'm like, holy shit, UFO, oh my God. And then my friend is still going like, what just happened? Where did it go? Like, what was that? I'm like, dude, it was a UFO. It's a fucking UFO. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said the F word. Sorry about that. I'll have to watch my language. It's YouTube, I know. Sorry. So I'm in a panic, right? I'm in a panic, and I'm looking everywhere.
YouTube only cares if you say something that.
Okay.
Folks
well, I'm trying not to cuss.
Don't want you
I tend to cuss,
but it's true, right?
Okay.
But
yeah,
and I had a video that was deleted by YouTube because I was just looking at the Medicare data and vaccines.
Ooh. And in those days that was okay.
I'll leave. So no, even now, like recently.
Oh, really? Well, so censorship. That's a whole nother show.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to say another word because God knows.
So I'm in a panic, right? I'm in a panic, and I'm now looking everywhere. Like, I don't know why I'm panicking. I don't know, but I am in a panic. And all of a sudden, I see two more lights. Now they're coming from the north. Now these ones are hauling ass, not UFO speed, nothing like that. But they're going fast, and I'm like, whoa, what's that? And so now we're both looking, and they've got the flashing red, they have the flashing lights, and they're hauling. All of a sudden you hear it.
Could you identify what kind of aircraft?
F-16s. They only had one exhaust.
Pod underneath.
I couldn't see the
exhaust underneath. Yeah.
All I could see when they went past.
The air intake. It's like the air intake
I couldn't see them because it's dark. So all I saw at first is the lights. Then you hear them, and then once they pass, it kept going. They're going in the same exact direction that thing just took off. So once they were past us, you could see that they had the afterburners on. Now, they were not supersonic. They were not, there was no breaking of the sound barrier, but they were going fast. They were hauling ass, two of them, and they were cooking. And they were going in the exact direction as that thing. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I'm freaking out. And as soon as they're gone, I'm like, that's it. We're out of here. He's like, what? He's still really discombobulated by the whole thing. But I am like I'm looking around. All I can think is they're coming. I don't want to be here. They're coming. Oh my God. So I start kicking dirt on the fire, pouring our water on it. Like, we got to put the fire out. We got to get out of here. We jump into the car. And I mean, I'm like, I don't know, 2 hours of like driving like a maniac to get us the hell off the mountain, because I'm literally having a fight or flight that I don't understand why, but I am like, must run for my life. That was how I was feeling. And so we get down, we talk about it, I bring it up to my stepdad, who's, Air Force. He went to the Air Force Academy, a Vietnam vet. A lot of Air Force people in Angel Fire and a lot of veterans of Vietnam, because when they came back from the war, America did not treat them very good. And they were like, I don't want to be around people. I want to go be around my own community. And so a lot of Vietnam vets sort of settled in Angel Fire. That's why now there's the Vietnam Memorial Chapel made by Dr. Westfall, who lost his kid. And so there was so I knew a lot of Air Force people. So I'm immediately trying to talk to them about it. And they're like, no, I don't know anything, or, whatever. And they were very cagey about it and weird. So I couldn't get anything out of my stepdad. We talked years later about stuff, but then I couldn't get anything. And so as soon as I would tell anyone what we saw, like, you just get that stigma immediately. People think, oh my God, you're just making up some story, blah, blah, blah. You saw UFOs. Sure. Right. Whatever. So now my friend, his dad was in the Air Force also. Now, he was a colonel, and from what I recall, and like I said, I don't have absolute clarity on this, but that he was an Air Force test pilot, and he had flown the SR-71. Now, I don't know what missions or what he ever did, but I knew he was that, right? So I'm telling him, because he was very religious, Christian, and he was like having an existential crisis about this thing, like, what do we see? What does this mean? And I'm like, man, your dad has to know. He's Air Force test pilot. He's flown the SR-71. Like, those were Air Force jets. Like, Air Force knows. Like, you gotta ask him. You gotta tell him what we saw. Like, you gotta get the info, because they were divorced. His dad did not live in Angel Fire. His mom did, with a stepdad. And so he was going to see his dad at the end of summer. I'm like, when you go see your dad, you have to ask him. So he was like, yeah, I'm doing it. So he goes, asks, comes back. He won't talk to me. He's totally like, absolutely like, will not discuss it with me, won't say anything, and he's avoiding me. And it's really pissing me off. And I keep showing up. I'm calling him. I used to, I had to drive them to school. We would go from Angel Fire to Taos. So when I wasn't around a bunch of people, I'd be like, dude, what the hell? Like, why aren't you talking to me about this? Like, I need to know. What did you say? What did he say? Tell me anything. And he just, nothing. I didn't talk to him. I can't say it. And I could tell, like, you're lying, man. And so it was driving me crazy. So I don't know, after maybe, it was fall. I remember it was fall. So it was probably a month and a half, 2 months after he'd come back. I gave him some excuse, like, oh, we're going to go to this thing. I'm going to pick you up. And so I picked him up, and then I just drove up into the mountains and parked. And I said, okay, we're not coming off this mountain until you tell me. I'm like, I've got you, and I know you're lying, and you're going to tell me. And so after a lot of hemming and hawing, he was like, okay, but you can't tell anyone like this. I'm telling you, like, my dad will kill me, and you don't understand, and you don't know what the, and I'm like, well, I don't understand. So you have to tell me. Like, so he tells me, he's sitting there with his dad in his house. And he starts telling him, Dad, I want to tell you the story. I saw this thing. And he starts telling him the story. And his dad just gets this look. And so he's like, Dad, I need to understand. And his dad just grabs him, walks him in a little private office, closes the door, turns on music. Okay. Sits his son down, gets very close to him. And he's like, son, because he's freaked out. He's like, Dad, am I crazy? Am I like losing my mind? Like, is this real? UFOs aren't real, right? And he's like, okay, son, you're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. You saw what you saw. Okay. But I can't tell you anything about it. He said, it's highly classified, higher than the bomb. This is very dangerous. And he basically gives him this whole threat narrative. Like, you can't talk about this. You can't put your name on a list. You don't research this. You don't tell anyone this story. You certainly don't tell me any fucking thing. And sorry, I did it again. But so he scared the crap out of him. He's still freaked out. He will not talk about this. And he even tries to act like, well, I remember you telling me all about that, but I don't, that wasn't me. I wasn't there. I'm like, oh, dude, come on, man. Like, what? So I come back now. I'm like, my wheels are spinning. Okay. And I'm like, oh my God, UFOs are real. The Air Force knows. They can track them because those jets were never close by. They never saw it physically with their own eyes unless they caught up to it later, like it stopped or something. I knew that for sure. it was long gone before they got there. So I'm like, oh my God, they never saw it. So that means they can track it. I'm like, well, where would those jets come from? Well, the closest base to Angel Fire would be Colorado Springs. NORAD is right there. So I'm like, holy shit, like NORAD is tracking UFOs. The Air Force is chasing them. Oh my God. Like for me, that was the moment. That was the light bulb moment where I'm like, oh my God, like this is real. UFOs are real and the Air Force knows and they're covering it up. Like this is the biggest secret in the world. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this information. I'm like overloaded with it. You know what I mean? So I can't tell anyone. I can't talk to anybody. I'm just like, what do I do? So that's when I start my investigations. I start, and because of the things he told me, I was like, okay, well, I can't write a check for books at the bookstore. I can't, I try to look for things in the library. I don't check out anything in the library. I read it in the library. I would, take it over to the Xerox machine. I'd make copies and take those home. So there was no evidence of me looking into UFOs or reading a, book that would put me on some sort of watch list or, you know what I mean? And like, so I was looking at, garage sales, things like that. If I saw anything, I'll pick it up at a garage sale or I pay with cash at a bookstore. So there's no record, things like that. So I was like, okay, I have to figure this out. But so now I'm talking to people, and I'm trying to get more knowledge and, trying to figure things out. And it's very difficult. Like anyone in my family, friends, they immediately just looked at me like you're nuts, and I was already a pretty wild person. I was pretty out there. So, I was like, I don't need everyone thinking I'm a liar or I'm full of shit. Like, so I have to just internalize. I have to just do this on my own. Like, I don't trust anybody else. That was a big issue for me. I was like, I can't, even my brother doesn't believe me. So how am I going to get anyone else to believe me? So I'm not going to tell this story. I'm just going to try to figure this out. And so then I see the Communion book for the first time. And the first time I saw a gray alien, like it sent shivers down my spine. Now I still have no memory of ever seeing a gray. Now, when I was younger, much younger, I used to have the owls in the room and like all these memories of like little people that I thought were like owls, like, I know I've interacted with them, but I don't remember them. I don't remember seeing a gray. But when I saw that face, I was like, it took my breath away. I'm like, oh my God, like, whoa. So I read that book and that's when I learned about missing time and abductions because I didn't know anything about that. And I was like, and the first time I started reading about those experiences, I flash on another experience of mine. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, that's what happened to me. That is what happened to me. And so now, once again, I did not connect this in any way to my sighting that I had before. And it was many years later when I figured out the timeline again, that all of these things happened in a very short period of time. So now, okay, so I told you that sighting, it started everything. That was June of 85. And the reason I know it's June is because if it was July, it would have been raining at night. So it couldn't have been monsoon season. So I don't have the exact dates. I know it was June. It had to be June because it was summer, there was no snow, and there was no rain. And that was nearly impossible in those days for you to go up in mid-July in the mountains without getting dumped on the whole time. So it had to be June. But now we go back about 2 months, and I was in a play in Taos, my high school. Grease, of course, everyone knows Grease. So I had a big role in Grease. I was the teen angel. I had a big musical scene and all this. But I would have to stay in Taos late to do, rehearsals and stuff. And because I stayed in Taos a lot, I stayed over a lot with friends over there and the director of my drama class who was putting on the play. So I would stay there a lot because I was like, I don't want to drive home. It's exhausting. It's like a 40-minute drive. So, but I don't remember why I had to go home that night. I think it must have been like a Friday because I probably had to work the next morning. I worked all the time. I was ski instructing and DJing, and I just had a bunch of jobs. So I always worked. And so I knew I had to get back to Angel Fire, but it was a snowstorm. It was a blizzard. But I was never afraid of snow. Like, I was fearless, okay? I was like, me and the beauty, I could take on any challenge, any amount of snow. I didn't care how much snow was in the pass. I wasn't afraid of it. I'm like, everyone's like, no, don't drive home. The pass is going to be bad. It's snowing, it's dangerous. I'm like, whatever. not for me. I'm impervious. So you know what I mean? So that's my mindset. So I'm driving through the pass. Now, anyone who's lived where it snows knows what I'm talking about when I say, so like when you're in a hardcore blizzard, you have to have your lows on, right? Because if you put your brights on, it's just snowflakes coming at you. I used to call it the Millennium Falcon, like the light speed effect. Like when they go to light speed, it's, that's what it felt like. So I was like, I had to keep my lights low, right? But I'm gripped because it is bad. I should not have been on the road. 100%.
And you're going downhill. You have to.
Well, I'm going uphill at this point. I'm not down the path. I'm still going.
It's still
towards
scary though, because like
it was rough. I mean, it was hardcore snow. I mean, it was dumping. So I'm like gripped. I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? Like I'm not sleepy. Is my point. So I am like gripped, right? And one of the things you'll know when you're on a 2-lane mountain highway is that, especially in a snowstorm, if there's a car coming around the corner, it's bright, right? Because their lights are lighting up all the snow. So you know if there's a car coming around the corner. You don't, you know? So I'm driving along. There's nobody else on this road. Like nobody is, and just to clarify, I think I left around 11:20. So it's late, right? So there's nobody on the road. It's dead and it's dumping. What I find out later is that not long after I went into it, they had closed the pass. So no one else is even coming in, but I'm in it already. So I'm just driving. So I'm getting to this corner, and all of a sudden there's this bright light. I mean, it is so bright coming around the corner. And I'm like, oh shit. Like all I can think is it must be like an 18-wheeler because it's got massive brights. It's got lights up top. It feels like it's got some orange, you know, it's very bright. So in my mind's eye, I'm like, I'm coming around the corner. I'm scared. I'm thinking, oh no, what is this guy doing on the road? Is he going to slide into me when I'm going around this corner? So I'm like kind of hugging this side and I'm like gripped on the steering wheel as I'm coming around the corner thinking I'm about to like see this giant 18-wheeler, right? And I'm coming around the corner. The next thing I know, I wake up. My car is in a snowbank. It's about a mile, maybe a mile and a half further down the road. I don't realize how late it is. It's about 3 hours later. And I just wake up and I'm like looking around. I'm like, oh my God. And this is what, and it's still in my head. I'm like, oh my God, I fell asleep at the wheel. I crashed into a snowbank. I'm lucky to be alive. Drive home. These 4 thoughts are in my head. Fell asleep at the wheel. Crashed into a snowbank. You know, lucky to be alive, drive home. So I'm like, holy shit, I crashed into a snowbank.
Were those ideas natural or did they
well, I'm going to get to that. So I don't know. At this point, that's what I think happened. I'm like, oh, I fell asleep at the wheel. And I'm like, I just believe the story, right? So I'm like, oh my God. And the weird thing is, okay, and I don't realize any of this is weird till this communion thing. Like this is when I first start looking at this experience because I believed it. I fell asleep at the wheel. I crashed into a snowbank. So little do I know, my mom and everyone are panicking. They don't know where I am. The pass is closed. So they're assuming maybe I didn't come. They can't find me. They're calling around. And I just back up the car. Now, here's the thing. It's 3 hours later. The car is running. It's in neutral. Okay? The heat is on. The lights are on. There's no snow on it. It's warm inside. Like all this stuff, right, that I don't realize is weird or anomalous till later. And so I'm just like, oh, I put it in reverse. I back out and I drive home. And my mom's like, oh my God. And I'm like, what happened? What happened? I'm like, I fell asleep at the wheel. I crashed into a snowbank. I'm lucky to be alive. And I drove home. So I'm okay. Everything's fine. And they just forget about it. Like, okay, John just was late. He fell asleep, crashed into a thing. And they don't think anything of it either. My mom barely remembers it even happening now. And so for years, people would be like, oh, what happened that night? I'm like, oh, yeah, well, I fell asleep at the wheel. Yeah, I crashed into a snowbank. Like I would just repeat the lines. Just like that was my explanation. Nothing that was weird about it. The fact that it was hours or anything. So now I'm like reading this book and I'm like, oh my God, like what happened? What happened to me? So now I'm like trying to understand and I'm trying to remember every single thing I can. What was weird about this story? And so I remember, I'm like, okay, how can I fall asleep at the wheel? The last thing I remember is I think I'm about to get into a car wreck. So I'm having like adrenaline surge, right? I'm like gripped on the steering wheel, coming around the corner, like almost shying away, going like I'm about to get hit. And then I remember nothing. And I'm like, how can I fall asleep? I wasn't tired. I was like gripped, right? So I'm like, that doesn't make sense. This does not make sense. How could I have fallen asleep? And then I'm like, well, how did I fall asleep and then get to that moment? But I'm like, yeah, when you're driving, sometimes you're just on autopilot. You don't remember getting everywhere. So I'm like, okay. But then I start dissecting what happened at that moment. I'm like, well, wait a minute. If I crashed into a snowbank, that means my car's in gear. It would have stalled. It was a stick shift. How could it be in neutral? That doesn't make sense. Why is my car warm? If I've been there 3 hours in the blizzard and it had turned off because I, like stalled the car, it'd be covered in snow. I'd be freezing to death. I probably would have died. I'm like, why is the heat on? Why are I don't understand. Like, how is this possible? And then I remember, oh shit, I had a wound on my chin, right? And I didn't realize this till I guess later the next day or the next morning. I don't remember exactly when I discovered it, but I discovered I had this, what now I call the scoop mark, which was something from the literature in those days. And it was like a scoop taken out of my skin, a little bone chunk and stuff. And it was cauterized. It didn't bleed. It was right on my right shin. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, what was that? And so I started seeing that in the literature. I'm like, holy shit. Like, I got scooped. Like, what the? And so I'm like trying to figure out. I'm like, what happened to me? Like, nothing makes sense. And then I start thinking about the programming. I'm like, that was like hypnotic suggestion. Did they just gave me a screen memory or a screen, like list, right? I'm like what the hell happened? Script.
Right. Like
yes. Right. Yes. That I bought hook, line, and sinker. I never even thought it was weird. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, oh my God, what happened? What happened? And then I remember that right after that event, I started having problems with urination. I couldn't pee and I didn't know what was wrong. I'm like, what's going on here? And I don't want to go into the whole story because that's a long story. But so basically, yeah, I had some problem in my urethra and they couldn't fix it in Taos. And I had to go to a urologist in Albuquerque with my mother and my uncle who's a doctor. And they were like, well, what happened to you? You've had some sort of traumatic injury in your urethra. Did you get kicked by a horse? I remember them. I'm like, what? No, I didn't get kicked by a horse. Like, what are you talking about? And so they were like, well, you've got all this scar tissue in there. Something happened to you. We don't know what it is. So all they could say is, well, maybe it was some sort of congenital defect. I don't know. And that's what they chalked it up to. You had some congenital defect, some stricture in your urethra, and they had to perform a procedure. I had to have it several times over the next couple of years where they would remove scar tissue so I could urinate because, I'm 18 years old. I'm like, I can't have a problem with my penis. So I was not talking about this to friends or family. And I certainly didn't connect it to this incident at all. Like, it's just another completely separate thing. And so when I started going back and like really looking into this, I'm like, oh my God. So wait a minute. The other part of that story. Okay. So I have traumatic injury to my, urethra. I have this scoop mark, right? And I'm going and having this surgery. But during that time, I go to the prom. And I don't want to go to the whole prom story, but Life magazine came to the prom. It was a huge deal. I was gone all week because I was in Albuquerque and nobody knew what I was there for, not even my brother, because he had a big mouth. And the last thing I wanted was everyone at school knowing John's dick is broken. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's not going to fly. So we had some bullshit story for my brother and my friends where I had gone. But so these Life magazine people are there at the school. My name keeps coming up and they want to do a profile on me, but I don't even know they exist, right? So I show up at the prom. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but needless to say, I get a full page in Life magazine. So I'm in Life magazine, okay, which was a big deal in those days, pre-internet, pre-anything. I mean, and I was in the table of contents and I had a big picture. And it was a big deal in Taos. Everyone in Taos was talking about it. And everyone was mad that I got to be the guy and it wasn't them. And it was just this huge deal. But once again, phenomena, pain and suffering, some sort of media exposure. Weird, right? So that was one of the things when I finally put together, okay, all of these things are connected, like this missing time event, these physical injuries to me, and then having this news story done about me, and then having an unambiguous sighting right afterwards that starts me on this path of discovery. So that's that whole how I got into this and how I started realizing I wasn't just someone who saw something. I was someone that something had been happening to, and I didn't understand it.
Now, why did, just for clarification, why did Life magazine want to do a story on you?
It's kind of like Ferris Bueller. Like when Bueller disappeared, everyone in school is like, where's Bueller? Where's Bueller? You know, and I had disappeared. And these people had came in and they were just doing background research at the school. And I guess when they were interviewing people, like who is an interesting character that we can follow around that would represent your school, my name kept coming up. But nobody knew where I was. Nobody knew like anything. And so it was like this mystery. Where is Strader? And my brother only had the bull crap story. So like it became a thing. Like everyone in school, everyone in Taos knew Life magazine was there and they were looking for me. But nobody could find me because I did not want to be found. I didn't want anyone knowing where I was or anything about it. And so it was a weird luck of the draw that I was supposed to have the surgery on Friday and the prom was on Saturday. So I was never going to be at the prom. Like they were never going to be about me. But when the anesthesiologist canceled and said, yeah, we're going to have to reschedule for Monday, I asked the doctor, I'm like, well, can I go to the prom? Well, at this point, they had put a stent in me. So I had like a thing inside there. So he was like, well, you know, you got to be really careful because if that thing gets dislodged, that could really be a problem. And you know, so he's telling me all these rules. Like you can't do A, B, C, no drinking, no partying, no dancing, no. You can go, but you have to take it easy. And I'm like, ugh. So I went up there and I basically was seen at the school while I was trying to get a date and sign up for the prom. And I couldn't find a date at the high school, which was sophomore through senior. So I had to go to what we called the junior high, which had 9th grade, was their last grade. Because I had, like everyone I knew already had a date. So I couldn't find a date. So I went and found this girl, got a date. So I show up at the prom. I'm late. I don't know anything. And then everyone's just coming at me. Oh my God, where have you been? Life magazine, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, and I'm like, like the last thing I wanted was a spotlight or any attention at all. And now everything is on me, right? And these people are like, hey, we've been looking for you. We want to talk to you. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. So, I mean, that whole story is a wild story just in itself. But so, yeah, so they had, and I still to this day never understood why when I never showed up and I was not interested in this at all, why they didn't just choose somebody else, but they didn't. So They forced me to dance. I did dance one song. I went wild because they heard all the stories about how wild I am. And I'm, doing all. So in the Life magazine, I'm doing this like huge karate kick. I'm flying in the sky. I mean, this was the days of like, Karate Kid. So I was like, yeah, like, and that's the picture of me like flying in the sky. I mean, and it hurt. It hurt in your junk. It sucked. But I was like on stage at that point. I was like, look, this is the only way to get rid of these people. They were like, we have to get pictures of you dancing with your prom date and we got to get this interview. And so I bailed. I didn't do the interview. I was like, I can't deal with this. I don't want anything to do with this. I was stressed out. Prom sucked. Me and the girl were not getting along. I felt like crap after dancing. I'm just like, everyone's peppering me with questions. I couldn't answer. I was like, I just got to get out of here. So and this is the 80s. So the Life magazine people went to a underage high school teenage party that I was supposed to be at that night, which I did not show up. And they were there partying with all these people because they were assured that I was going to show up. And they were like, okay, we're going to get this interview with this guy. If we have to go party with them, they're like New Yorkers, like in their 30s. And they're partying with a bunch of high school kids. It was the 80s. And I never showed up. So that next morning, I drive back to Albuquerque. I do my whole procedure. And it was either the day or the day after. I'm still in the hospital. I'm on meds. And my phone rings in the hospital room. And it's this lady. And now she's in New York, and now we're doing this interview. She's interviewing me, and she's got all this background on me, and she's asking me all about the prom, and I'm, of course, telling her how horrible it was for me, and it was just, what a nightmare, and I didn't know, and she was, like, bummed out, because she's like, I thought I was going to get this great story, right? Like, this guy was supposed to be this amazing person, and he didn't want anything to do with this, and all he's doing is crapping on prom completely, and that was the whole story was about proms in America. And Taos was just one of many proms that they visited, right? So it was a whole story on proms in America, all these different things. And Taos, for some reason, was picked, and I was some reason picked. And so I just remember, like, in the thing, she was like, finally like, well, did you have any fun at all? all? And I'm very sarcastic and goes, oh yeah, it was beyond fun, right? Beyond fun. And so the quote in the Life magazine is John Strader, a night in heaven. It was beyond, he proclaimed. And then this giant picture. And that's all they said about me, because I had nothing to add, but it was immortalized for life. You know what I mean? And like now when I look at it, I'm like, I had just had some sort of sketchy situation happen with my penis and this and that. And now it's like on display for the whole damn world. Like, you know, it's just weird, really weird. So that's how that happened.
So this led you to start asking questions.
Yep.
Okay, let's end right there, and we'll pick up there in the next episode.
Okay.
So, John,
that's a lot.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, and I'm sure the audience is going to be waiting on bated breath for the next.
We've barely scratched the surface. Unfortunately, yeah. That's the hard part. Like,
we don't have a ton of time. So
yeah, I know, I get it. I get it.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.